Okay, I'm going to make a short little video here about the AR636 setup. Go to my YouTube folder, launch the Spektrum programmer software. When you've got a receiver that you just can't make work right, sometimes the best thing to do is just go to Models and say Add New, and this is without a receiver connected. And you'll notice all the different kind of receivers that you can make a configuration for. So if you've got AR636 with firmware 2.x and you want safe in it, this would be the one to pick. And you can't see the bottom of the screen, so you have to pull it up. And you can give it a name if you want to. And notice it says finish. It doesn't take you through the wizard like it does with a non-safe version 1.x firmware receiver. And the orientation screen goes away. So here's our new model, and you can rename it here if you want to. But here's the dashboard that shows you all of your AS3X settings. And notice the gains are all set to 0. The priorities are all set to 100. The dual rate's 100, and the expo is 0 for all 3 flight modes for all 3 control surfaces. So if you want AS3X on a channel, then you go to gain and priority and you turn the gain up. Notice when you turn it up, and I generally start with a gain of 30% on roll. So you click on the line and you'll get 10% each click. And notice it's 30%, and you see the curve or the graph of how the gain's going to work. When the stick's in the center, you get 30%, and when the stick is at full deflection, it drops to 0. Now, if you're going to use AS3X and you're going to use low rates in your transmitter, if you set the low rate to 50%, and I don't recommend ever setting it lower than 50% because it kills the resolution of your radio. But as you click on this line, it comes up by 10% each time. I set mine to 150. At 150%, the gain goes from whatever the max value is, the set point, down to 0 at half stick. Basically, what I do in my mind is I take the number 200 and I subtract the priority from it, which gives 50. So that tells me that it's going to go to 0 at 50%. If I wanted to go to 0 at 40%, which, like I said, I would never turn my radio down to 40%, I'd set this to 160, and it would be like that, and it would go to 0 at 40. But I never go below 50, so 150 works for me all the time. Every airplane, set them all the same. And so 30% for roll. I do 10% more on the elevator on pitch because it's usually not going to oscillate as easily as the ailerons could or the wing. And I also set the priority to 150%. So we got 40. And on mine, I've been doing this long enough that I want AS3X on all the time. But if you wanted it off, just leave the gain at 0. And then for yaw, I add another 10%. So that would be 50. and I set the priority to 150. And since I put my safe mode on flight mode 3, I leave the priority set to 100 because I don't use reduce throw in safe mode. If you reduce the throw in your transmitter or in the dual rate of the receiver, you won't get the bank angle that you've got set into the receiver. So let me go ahead and set these the way I would have them. 50% in all 3 flight modes, 150 for the priority for the 2 that are going to be AS3X. And I put my receiver flight modes on the rate switch in my transmitter. So the way I do it is flight mode 1 is low rates with AS3X, and flight mode 2 is high rates with AS3X, and flight mode 3 is safe with full travel in the transmitter and the receiver for safe mode. So let's see. And when I get done, I'll go back to the dashboard. Here you can look at everything real quick. You got 30, 40, 50. You got 150 on all of them. Dual rate's 100%. I do the dual rate in the transmitter. Doesn't make any difference. And it's easier to change in the transmitter. You don't have to get your laptop out or the Bluetooth dongle or whatever and use an app. I just do it in the transmitter. It doesn't care. What the receiver cares about is the overall travel coming from the transmitter. The expo really doesn't affect it much as far as the way the gyro works. So anyway, we're going to go back and look at this again. 30, 40, 50, 150%, 100 for the travel, 0 for expo. And then 30, 40, 50, 150 for priority, 100% travel, 0 expo, 30, 40, 50, 100% for the priority since I'm going to be using full travel and I've got safe mode on this flight mode. Dual rate's 100, expo is 0. So these are all set good. And like I say, if you want one flight mode to be no gyro, just turn the gain to 0. Just go to each one of these and set it to 0. And you come back here, see your gains are all 0. The priority is 150%, but it's not being used because there's no gain. So that's how you would do this channel, or this flight mode is no gyro. This one is AS3X, and this one is safe if you set the safe settings using the Flight Engineer software. Then flight mode switch, I always use channel 7, but if you only have a 6-channel transmitter, you're going to have to use channel 5. And then aircraft type, the standard normal type for most airplanes. Surface setup, you're going to have to go in here and do your reversing here. Do not do it in the transmitter because the gyro and the control stick will be backwards to each other and it will crash your plane. So leave your transmitter set to normal. Do the reversing in here in this receiver and do your sub trim in the receiver. Leave your sub trims in your transmitter set to 0 because the gyro input needs to see when your stick is centered. And if you fly your airplane and you had to use a good amount of trim to make it fly straight, you need to adjust your linkages so that you can center the trims in your transmitter and bring the output of the transmitter back to 0 at stick center. So check each one of these, do your reversing, do your sub trim here for ailerons, elevator, and rudder. Port assignment, make sure you check this right here, turn on safe. I don't know why, but you click one of them and the other two go to safe automatically. But that works, no problem there. And just look over everything again. There's no mix. Here's your gain and priority. Don't mess with dual rates, leave it 100%. Don't mess with expo, leave it at 0. Do all the dual rate and expo in the transmitter. Now, you need to export this config file so that you've got a copy of it. So pick a place to put it. And I'll go back to my desktop and YouTube. And this is a new safe AR636. If I can type receiver and save it. And you can go in here and give it a name. Like I said before, you can always change the name. And I like to use version numbers. If I make a small change, like a change to gains or something, I will increment the decimal side. If I make a major change, like if I make some amazing discovery that needs to be applied to all my receivers, then I will change the main number to a higher number. That lets me know that the config file has my latest and greatest setup in it. So export it, and it knows the name from what I just gave it, so save that. Now when you connect your receiver up, and got one connected here, all right, it picked the last one I was working on. That's what was loaded in the receiver before. But I've got this new AR636 1.0, so when I hit select, that writes it to it. Now that receiver has that setup in it. All right, now we've got to do the safe side of this. So we go to Safe Model Builder, and we load that new file. And let me get to where it's at. I've got to go to the desktop and YouTube, and here's that new file that I just exported. All right, so we're going to set the orientation here, however it needs to be set for the way it's mounted in the plane. And remember, if you hook up this receiver and it thinks it's upside down because of the way you set the orientation, it will not initialize. It's not that it's defective. You have to put the receiver right side up according to how you set this. So if you flip the receiver over, don't put it on the table or in the plane right side up and expect it to initialize. It won't. It has to be in the proper orientation. So be sure and set that, and be sure adhere to it when you're operating a receiver. All right, do not use safe select. That will just screw things up. Turn that off. Turn on this. Set it to the right channel. Channel 5 if you got a 6-channel transmitter, and use channel 6 for panic if you want to. You don't have to. But since I have a 9-channel transmitter, I always set the receiver flight mode to channel 7. Uncheck this box if it's checked. You don't want to turn it off. If you're going to use safe, just turn it on. Use this and enable them overall. So these two boxes, this one and this one, need to be checked. Then flight modes. All right, now like I said, I use flight mode 3 for safe, and I use self-level, and I use throttle to elevator mix on the low end only. You don't need panic because you're in safe. It's gonna self-level if you'll just let go of the stick. I do use panic on flight mode 1 and 2. The flight mode 1 will be low rates with AS3X if I have the gyro turned on, or if I have the gain set above 0. Flight mode 2 will be high rates with AS3X. Flight mode 3 will be safe mode with throttle elevator mix at idle only. And I'll set the bank limits according to the plane. If the plane does, say, 50 miles an hour, or it's 100 watt per pound electric plane, 45 degrees for bank angle is pretty good. If the plane has 150 watts per pound or does 75 miles an hour, you might want to set this to 60, because the plane's going to take further to turn around at a higher speed if you can't bank it far enough. And then if it's an EDF, which is doing 100 miles an hour or so, then I set this to 85 degrees so that the wings can get almost vertical and I can make sharp turns at full throttle with my jets. And then down usually is 30 and up is 45. I just switched to 60 up and 45 down for my jets. But let's say we're setting up a relatively slow airplane, so we're going to use 45, and we're going to use 45 up. I like 45 up because you can take off and climb above the tree line if you've got one. You can clear obstacles if you got 45 degrees up, and you know, most planes ought to be able to climb at a 45 degree angle, except for really underpowered ones. So like I say, for a trainer, 45 up, 30 down. Make sure panic's enabled in both of them. Kind of look this over. And then go to panic mode. And in panic mode, I use channel 8. If you only have a 6-channel transmitter, you're going to have to use channel 6. So I use 8, and be sure and check this box so that you don't have to reverse the panic mode channel in the transmitter. And then you can set the angles for this. I don't know if you're aware, but you can still use the stick to fly the plane when you're while you're holding the panic button. It still works. It doesn't lock your plane into straight and level. You can still move the stick and fly. So if it were a jet, I'd probably put the bank angle to 60 and the up to 45, so that I've got a little more control while I'm holding the panic button. See, I might be flying around in low rates and get out too far and lose orientation of the plane, and I can just hit the panic button and use the stick to turn the plane and bring it back toward me. Or I can flip from low rates to high rates on my rate switch and go to safe mode and do it. You know, that's what I've been doing. But you know, if you set up panic mode, you could use it. And then throttle elevator mix, I always set the upper end to 85, but I never put anything in it for the angle. I don't want my airplanes to climb at full throttle. And then for the idle end or low end, I set it to 40, and I use the linear mix that increases the further below 40 you go. And generally I'll set that to something like 5. You want the gyro to let the nose come down when you throttle back, so that the airplane doesn't keep flying flat and level and get too slow and stall. So you need a little bit of down. Maybe you need 6 or 8, depends on the airplane. But this is where I start, 40 with 5 and 85 and 0. And then on this, notice that Spektrum defaults this to 18. Those are pretty good numbers. You really don't need to increase these much at all. 15 is enough for roll, and really I prefer 20 for pitch, but you can click one time on this bar and increase these to 23, leave these at 18, and it'll work. Works with just about any kind of airplane. You really don't need to mess with these much. If you turn these up too high, the servo will move to full travel long before the stick hits the stop. So you don't want to go crazy with these. This is a good setting right here to start out. Then for the pitch, this attitude trim is compensation for if the receiver is not mounted in the airplane level, or it's tilting in the roll axis and the plane doesn't want to fly straight, you may have to put in a small value. Like if you stick the receiver to the inside wall of the fuselage, it may not be perfectly vertical and you may have to use a little bit of compensation on the roll. I always have to use pitch, and generally minus 1,000, that's 10 degrees nose up, or 1,200 might be better. I like to go a little too high to begin with because I want the plane to climb. If anything, I don't want it to descend when I go into safe mode. So start with minus 1,200, and you may have to reduce it a little bit to keep the plane from climbing, or you may have to increase it to keep it from descending at full throttle. That's where you're going to set these, at full throttle, or at least above half. But what you can do to get the name, I mean, you could just click save and it should, well, here's the name of the file you're working on right there. That's what it's going to overwrite. But if you click in here and you hit Control A, it highlights it. If you hit Control C, it copies it to the clipboard, and then you can do Save As, and you can do Control V and paste it in there. And you could change the name if you wanted to. Of course, the name here needs to match the name right there. You want them to be the same. But at any rate, so Control V, click Save. Yes, I want to replace it. And then I go back here, and what you need to do is pick a different setup temporarily. Delete the one that has the same name of the one you just edited, and then import the one that you just edited. And here it is, and now select it. So there it is. Now go back and look at your dashboard. I've got the gyro gain set to 0 so that flight mode 1 has no AS3X or safe. Flight mode 2 is AS3X only, and flight mode 3 is safe with AS3X. The switch is set for channel 7 like I do it. The airplane type should be good. The surface, remember, you're going to have to do the reversing here. Don't do it in the transmitter. Do the sub trims here. To get your servo arms perpendicular to the push rods, use the sub trim here. Leave the sub trims in your transmitter set to 0. And try to use 100% travel in your transmitter, except for low rates. You can reduce them down to like 70% or so. I don't recommend ever going below 50%, because when you do, you turn your 2048 bit radio into a 1024 bit radio, and you need all the resolution you can get. If your servos don't move 40 degrees or at least 30 degrees, If they move less than 30 degrees, then the push rod doesn't move very far. The slack in the push rod's a bigger percentage of the travel. Your controls will get sloppy. So try to keep your servos moving at least 30 degrees either side of center in low rates and 40 degrees either side of center in high rates. That way your radio works the best and your airplane flies the best. So then we've got these are set good. So we're good. Now, if you look at this and you make any change, you need to come back here and you need to export it again and update your file that you're keeping. So that's it. Turn the power off to the receiver before you shut this program down. If you're powering the receiver from an ESC or a battery, do not check this box or you could burn up the USB port in your computer. And the USB port will only power the receiver without servos connected to it. If you plug a servo up to a receiver and try to power it from the USB port, the servo is going to steal the power from the receiver. It's not going to work. So if you got servos hooked up, you need to use a separate battery. If it's just the receiver, you can power it from the USB cable, but be careful. So I'm going to turn the switch off on the receiver. And now it's off. So there you go. That's how I do it.